Well, hello, my friends. Look, 2020 has been a very raucous year for many of us, and many people have this preconception that 2020 has been a terrible year. But for me and my commentary career, my budding commentary career, 2020 has actually been pretty good. I'm actually very thankful. I'm very happy that 2020 has been how it's been. And for me, as a young, growing commentator, I have learned so much. I have developed so much. I have honed my skills so much. 2020 has been an indispensable year for me. I've started Pensive Politics in February, and when I started Pensive Politics, I didn't dream that anyone but my closest friends and a few family members would watch it. I didn't dream that it would have the still minimal, but still pretty sizable reach that it has right now. I never dreamed I would be interviewing presidential candidates and politicians. I never dreamed that I would have this YouTube channel where I could offer concise commentary, very compelling commentary, very philosophically rich commentary about these things. I always figured, oh, Christian, you'll just, come on, dude, you'll just be another voice in a sea of millions or thousands. But you guys are helping me become someone a little bit bigger, a little bit larger. And for that, I bless you. For that, I say God bless you. And here are a few of my favorite moments from 2020. Before I let you guys watch the video, I must urge you, please, if you can donate to my Patreon or my PayPal or anything, even if it's just $1, $2, anything will help me continue to be the best person that I can be, the best commentator I can be. It'll help me keep producing good content for you in 2021, because going forward I intend to do this a lot more. I intend to have daily uploads, maybe 2 videos a day. If you guys help me out, I will deliver. If you deliver for me, I will deliver. Without further ado, my friends, welcome to the video, and please enjoy the content. Love you, and Happy New Year. I like how you put all of that, because again, I think that a lot of African Americans have been entrapped into thinking that the government is necessary for them to survive in this country, necessary for them to be considered as people in this country, because it was the government that did pass the Civil Rights Act. But it passed the Civil Rights Act not because it's the government, because it for once, government actually acknowledged a single truth, that individuals are valuable and don't deserve to be treated differently because of an arbitrary characteristic. And so, but the government itself is predicated, or how the government acts is predicated upon untruths, lies about how people act, forced altruism, these benevolent desires manifested through dark means, so to speak. Okay. And so, yeah, to put it artistically. And so I'm happy that we have this
I'm not so eloquent. I just talk nuts and bolts to people.
No, that's good. I could never run president. But piggybacking off of that, what do you think of the sort of idea that as we continue to see many people get scared about they're losing their job to some foreign industry or whatever, and that sort of protectionist ideology, that nationalist ideology that is baked into a sentiment of competition, not cooperation, competition between the United States and China and Russia and our adversaries. What do you think we can do, or your campaign can do in this season, to dispel that notion and to root it out from the political discourse, or to soothe the very real fear of someone losing their job to someone and disconnect it from a sentiment that might be opposed to immigration coming here? How does the Jorgensen campaign fight the same kind of fear that has the same foundation that a lot of people who are concerned about racism have? The idea, because both of them say, okay, I need the government to protect me from people who are racist, I need the government to protect me from people who are going to take my job. How do you fight those things at their foundation? What do you do? Do you just talk to people? Do you use statistics? How do you reach people in the depths of their soul to dispel that sort of fear around that kind of stuff?
Well, how about using motivation? Typically,
ooh, okay.
People will typically work more if they get more money, right? And in fact,
yes,
that's why the Soviet Union failed. They had a policy of basically, we pretend to pay you, you pretend to work. So the first thing I would do is I would get rid of the corporate income tax so that companies wouldn't be putting factories around the world, so that they are more likely to stay here and people are more likely to have jobs here. But secondly, maybe there are some things that are economically more feasible to be produced overseas, but we have advantages to produce other things here. And
Yes.
what we're looking for is overall economic prosperity.
Uncle Tom, once again, found his freedom in spirituality. And a lot of African Americans did as well, before they could be physically free. So it's like an input-output table, a dualism, a two-dimensional fraction that you had to solve, an equation. And Uncle Tom had solved half of that equation, but he was saving the other half of that equation for the other people who he cared about, so they could have that physical freedom and all that conceptual freedom. Why do you think African American spirituals exist? Why do you think, 12 gates to the city, we're going to get to the promised land? I'm going to scream and shout when I get to heaven, no one's going to keep me out. I'm going to lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. Why do you think these things were shouted to the rooftops? Because Uncle Tom and a lot of these African American slaves had that conceptual 360 vision to understand that their existence was not merely a combination of processes, biological processes, but their existence was instead a combination of biological and spiritual processes that needed to be in sync if they were ever going to be able to fulfill what was meant for them to fulfill. Do you understand what I'm saying? As Machiavelli said in The Prince, in the sketch image, when the ruler is on top of the mountain, he can see everything. When he's down in the field, his vision is confined. Well, guess what? Uncle Tom was on top of that conceptual mountain. He saw everything. He may have been physically unchanged, physically in the fields, but on top of that mountain, he saw everything. He knew it was important. And he knew that his spiritual resistance would pave the path for people he cared about, his wife, Eliza, all people he cared about, the people in the story, to be free. And so did African Americans who sung those spirituals. And before Harriet Tubman could go down there and get so many of them from the South, she recited scriptures to them. She made sure that their spiritual health was in good standing. That their spiritual health was going to be able to stand the test of time. Because if the will is defeated, your actions will also go down. So in that sense, I am more than happy to follow by Uncle Tom's Teflon example. I am more than happy to understand the character for what he truly is. And I am more than happy to rebuke anyone who would dare deem me or anyone else derisively an Uncle Tom while not realizing that that is actually the greatest concept, the greatest compliment you can give to someone by calling them that name.
I'll start with you here on this, Christian. I'm going to just play a few things for you. Look at the former First Lady's remarks and get your response. Michelle Obama calling for the country to come together by implying Trump voters are pro-lies, pro-hate, pro-chaos, and pro-division. She also posted comments trashing the president by praising the coming return of dignity, competence, and heart to the Oval Office. Christian, does that sound like a unifying speech to you? Why or why not?
Absolutely not. And I think that we've realized that when the left says they want unity, they typically mean they want you to believe what they believe and nothing else. And that's just a really complex formula for a country that is dealing with a pandemic, that is dealing with a lot of deep-rooted political divisions. And for Michelle Obama to speak like that about people who are just as valid as anyone else in their political opinions is nothing short of condescending and really disgusting.
Christian, do you think that she remembers, when she's making these speeches, that she remembers what happened over the summer with the rioting and the looting? If you looked at, it was the left that was organizing these horrible things that were happening in cities across our nation.
That's absolutely right. But I think that for Michelle Obama and a lot of these other people, it doesn't matter what reality says because they are so divorced from the effects of their rhetoric. This is why it's easy for her to have these kind of beliefs. I mean, Thomas Sowell said it best. Politicians will often say granular things because guess what? They don't have to feel the effects of it. I think that Michelle Obama is operating in that same headspace, and it's really dangerous for the country, in my opinion.
But the problem with this COVID analysis is primarily how we are not seeing it as an opportunity to focus on our individual health, as an opportunity to focus on our ability to protect life, on an opportunity to focus on how we can change narratives and thus liberate us from the specters and the icy cold touch of fear that has been used time and time again to subordinate people to certain presuppositions, to certain preconditions, to certain actions. We should be focusing on COVID as a vector for change, not as an harbinger of destruction. We're fighting COVID. COVID's lethality is incredibly low compared to most viruses. And even more so now that we have we're using medication and certain drugs to combat its effect on the human body. We are quite literally kicking this disease and subordinating it beneath the hill of victory that is so integral and inherent to that Promethean human spirit that blaze forth truth and knowledge and disperse with illusions and disperse with falsehoods. We are quite literally liberating ourselves from the specter of fear and ignorance that we had back in March, back in April, that caused us to do so many calamitous things to our economy and our society, and we are finding a better path. But there are folks who want you to think that because at the start we had some issues fighting this thing, in the middle of the game we're going to have more issues. There are folks who want to necromantize the past, and this is the past 2 months ago, and use that necromantic curse of the past and put it onto the future and thus entrap us all into that spirit of stasis. That's the government. We have to liberate ourselves from these mindsets, folks, if we want to actually get better. Ladies and gentlemen, if we want to challenge what we saw from Chelsea Handler, we ought to first challenge ourselves to understand voters, and more importantly, understand Americans as who they are in the core of their hearts, and that is individuals. I will not be appeased by a presidential candidate not knowing who Tupac is, or pretending to know who Tupac is, or not knowing who the latest rapper is, or claiming she has hot sauce in her bag. I will not be appeased by such pleasantries. I will only be appeased by that which radiates the political fire of truth, which confirms the principles upon which this country was founded upon. That is what shall appease me. That is what shall drive me and my passions to involve in political action and to involve myself in something higher than our current state. But I will not be appeased by what is mundanely called identity politics, but what is more deeper and should be more appropriately called soul-crushing pandering. It's not merely identity politics. It crushes the essence of our soul, where militias reflect the Emersonian principle of self-reliance, of ensuring that their constitution, their bodies, their lives, their standards are enforced and held strong amidst chaos. That's what militias are. Now, there are some militias that are badly motivated. There are some militias that have no virtue to them, of course. There are a lot of white supremacist militias that have zero virtue whatsoever, because white supremacists, of course. There are militias that are no good. 100%, I agree with you. There is no debate here. But the militias that we see defending property owners, when cops do not, when the military is only defending, or when the National Guard is only defending government property, they are not unvirtuous. They are genuinely, or at least their actions in that moment are not unvirtuous. I can't speak to who they are outside of those moments. But within a moment of defending someone else's property from someone who has no business trying to attack it or loot it or whatever, that is virtue. And so I am happy these militias exist. I am happy there are civilians who are willing to take upon their God-given right of self-defense, who are willing to postulate the truth of the Second Amendment, who are willing to postulate the truth of natural rights and defend their fellow men. I am happy to see the brotherhood and sisterhood of man manifest in such a palpable way. I am happy there are people who hold these principles to be self-evident, clear, and actionable. I am happy. And if you believe, regardless of your political disposition, if you believe that every individual in America and every individual in this world has an unalienable right to be left alone, has an unalienable right to live in solidarity with themselves and sanctity with themselves, has an unalienable right not to be molested by a bunch of riotous bandits, then you must also, to be philosophically consistent, submit to the principle that those militias are doing something virtuous and desirable. Listen, the frontier defined what became America. The frontier was defined by people who had very little education but had a lot of grit and wit, who were individualists, who knew that life would not come and give them luxuries. They had to work. They had to get down in the dirt, in the mud. They had to mix things around that they couldn't be mixed. They had to do all kinds of labor in the hot sun, in the scolding winter. They had to brave the natural elements. They had to fight off wild beasts. But eventually they built something. They built homes, families, buildings, towns. They created localities. They harvested natural resources. And now the area where the frontier was, the Midwest and all of that, is perhaps one of the most bustling economic areas in the country. And it rivals parts of the world with natural gas industry and so on and so forth. The frontier is an aspiration that we should hold in our hearts, my friends. The frontier mentality is what caused those men in 1776 to say, I am done with a British king. I am done being treated like I am some sort of serf. I am done being regarded as chattel. I am done, and I shall rise up in the truth of my individuality, in the truth of myself, and I shall persist in that truth and ensure that who I am as a person is reflected in the laws, and my right to exist alone, to be left alone, that principle of negative rights shall exist in the law, and that anyone else that tries to molest us in the future shall be beaten back by the virtuous tides of Americanism. That is what these militias represent in Wisconsin, my friends. Precisely that. And if you are against that, you must consider your paradigm. You must reconsider a lot of things. Because if you are against that, my friends, then you are for tyranny. Or you are indifferent towards tyranny. I could pull it up from you by one of their columnists debunking this conspiracy theory.
I don't know about columnists, but if you go to the non-opinion section, you can see Ilhan Omar married her brother as part of a marriage immigration fraud scheme. She did too. It's all proven. It's all out there.
No, it's not. A few of the nurses that are doing this OnlyFans stuff, as reported by BuzzFeed News, they're doing this because they think that if they don't get the money, they'll be in a bad spot, and so they're willing to compromise their ability to cultivate character to do this kind of stuff. I'm not saying that sex workers can't cultivate character. They can, but I don't think that you cultivate character when you are monetizing the most mundane and apparent thing about you, your appearance. Character is both a hidden and a visible quality, my brothers and sisters. Your character ideally will become visible through your actions. But when you engage in sort of carnal, physical actions, you don't allow your character to have a mechanism by which it can go forth and actually implement itself. That's one of the reasons why I don't think OnlyFans is very healthy, because it absolutely handicaps one's ability to cultivate character beyond the carnality. If it becomes a thing of a question of distinctions. And what I mean by that is, if it becomes, okay, I have to get through college, therefore, let me go sell my body for on the internet or whatever, and then once I get through college, I can leave that lifestyle behind. But you have spent so much time and so much energy just pumping resources into a process that takes away from your ability to cultivate your character. It is, in a sense, zero sum. Here's the bind, the economist bind. It's either you support law enforcement entirely, or you have a little reservation about them, and therefore you hate them entirely.
Yeah.
And on the left, it's either if you support law enforcement, you support years upon decades of injustice, which in their view is ingrained into the very spirit of America. And if you are law enforcement yourself, you're a part of that system, even if your actions are benevolent. So both sides, even my side, the right-leaning side, have work to do. I can support individuals within law enforcement. I can support the concept of law enforcement, while also on an individual level scorning and lancing those who dare raise their hands or dare raise their weapons against someone unjustly. I can scorn those baleful circumstances. I needn't hate all of law enforcement, or I needn't not support law enforcement to dislike bad law enforcers. But when the other side, Black Lives Matter, says we have to get rid of all the police, they do two things. Number one, they endeavor in a fallacy, but that fallacy is very, very powerful from a presentation standpoint. What that fallacy does, it frames the conversation as an all or nothing, a zero-sum quality. They are quite literally anointing the political conversation with a zero-sum quality. And when you do that, there is no wiggle room. I think that is intentional, actually. It's intentional.
Absolutely.
A lot of them will tell you it's intentional. So the right has kind of been not infected, but hit by this zero-sum proposition that BLM gives them. But I say, don't be hit by that. Don't buy into it. Rephrase the conversation. Rephrase the conversation, because if the right truly values liberty and we truly value free thought and individualism, let us engage the conversation within at least the space of individualism. What do you think about that? So whenever you have, and this is a natural principle, whenever you have the accumulation of resources, talent, and potential in one area, and it's as a machine, as a factory, turning into something great, you're going to have disparities. Or whenever you simply have a lot of something that other people do not have, you're going to have disparities. Now, the argument is that white folks have had more than black folks have had over the years, and this idea of generational wealth, since white folks were allowed to buy houses and buy property and divest their assets in different areas earlier than blacks were, whites are better off or whatever, which is just nonsense, because guess what? Wealth is not static. It is not a collective sum. There were plenty of black families, even amid the horror of Jim Crow, which it was truly a horror, truly a terrible plague on human consciousness, which completely and utterly destroyed our ability, or the ability of some people, to engage in basic human empathy. Even in the horror of Jim Crow, there were black individuals who were creating businesses and then coalescing their communities who were not allowed in the other businesses, and white businesses, to go to those businesses, and they were creating wealth for themselves. And there are, even right after slavery was abolished, even in the 1860s or after the 1860s, there were freedmen colonies like Greenwood, Tulsa, Black Wall Street, that created immense amounts of wealth despite palpable racially contrary situations, circumstances to that effect. So I don't want to hear this idea that wealth, that all blacks have a certain amount of static wealth that is put in a treasure chest and that is only accessible by certain people who have certain advantages. I don't want to hear that, because that's nonsense. Wealth is a dynamic quantity that each and every person has in some way, shape, or form. These clothes that I have, even though they were bought on the clearance rack, they're still a form of wealth. Seriously. Not a lot of wealth, but there's still some wealth. All of us have wealth in our own different ways. It may have been true that it was a little bit harder under certain institutional barriers, or a lot harder, for African Americans to acquire general modes of wealth, like credit cards or other things that we use today to ensure transactions are going to be fruitful for the future. But it is absolutely untrue that this is a palpable factor that is denying African Americans their ability to succeed in this world exponentially. It is not the factor, or a palpable factor. It may have been a factor in the 60s or the 70s even, or the 80s even, but after 50 to 60 years of constant social and institutional revolutionization of laws, of mindsets, of ideas, we have moved to a point where African Americans, I can say this, African Americans are largely only held back by their own mind or by their own desires to where they want to go. They are either held back or progressed on the basis of those few things. Your condition is predicated upon you, my friends. You have to understand that. You have to believe that. You have to take that, and you have to apply it to your life. Because if you do not, you will continue to blame other people for your mistakes and for your shortcomings for the rest of your existence. And that is no way to live. That is no way to live, and it also obscures you from seeing the truth. And the truth is, these billionaires that are so maligned and denigrated are actually helping all of us survive this thing. From a practical standpoint, from a moral standpoint, they are producing value for you, and they're making your life easier. And from a purely detached standpoint, there's nothing wrong with being rich. provided those funds did not come from thievery or coercion, wealth is not a vice. In fact, all of us have wealth. I think we measure wealth in a very messed up way, in a very botched way these days. Wealth is seen as the amount of, I don't know, is the amount of what? Wealth is oftentimes seen as the amount of our net worth or whatever. And I guess in the terms of the financial industry and how a lot of us understand wealth in terms of numbers, I guess that's so. Wealth is a little bit more than just numbers, though, my friends. Wealth is also possession. There are a lot of people who are not necessarily all that wealthy in terms of the real numbers game of wealth. But in their possessions, they have so much of value that could produce value for someone else, which will in turn cause the real number sense of wealth to interact with their dormant sense of wealth and make them traditionally, conventionally wealthy. Just look at baseball cards, for goodness sakes. There are antique baseball cards that go for hundreds of thousands of dollars that make people millionaires. There are all kinds of things. Wealth is not this fixed quantity. Just because Jeff Bezos has billions of dollars does not mean you can't have billions of dollars one day. It's not fixed. Wealth is dynamic. It grows. It goes up. It goes down like a seesaw, like a roller coaster, like whatever simple mechanism you want to explain wealth through.
Yeah, well, here in Georgia, where I am, you have an entire system built upon these sort of false notions of, tax incentives and corporate welfare. And again, the argument is always, well, the movie industry comes here because it's cheap to produce here. I'm like, well, that's great. Why is it cheap to produce here? We give them tax credits, an obscene amount of tax credits, not just because taxes overall are cheap, which they are here in Georgia, but we subsidize their films. And that makes us accountable to them, which is why when the state legislature tried to pass the religious freedom law, all the studios said, nope, no religious freedom. If you do that, we will pull out. And almost a lot of politicians were kowtowing and bowing and crying and groveling. Oh, please don't pull out. We need you. This is the effect, in my opinion, of sort of efficiency arguments over principle arguments, over sort of rule arguments. I mean, if you simply abide by the rule, first of all, that the government is meant to do 3 functions, contracts, military defense, and things of that sort of night watchman state, you wouldn't have these problems in the first place. But people are so often bound by contingency, by circumstance, and they lose sight of that. They become statisticians and not actually people who believe in principles. I think that kind of sacrifices our credibility and sacrifices our Americanism on the altar of, of getting ahead of expediency. And that disturbs me a lot. And so I have to ask you this. What do you think about the idea of voting? Because libertarian theorists for a very long time are conflicted. Some, like Lysander Spooner, will say, no, voting is bad. It's evil. It wills the state again. Others will say, no, maybe it's necessary for certain things. I mean, I'm conflicted. I don't feel passion for a lot of people in elected office. I don't feel connected. I don't feel as if they understand the principles of America. And even if they don't share my paradigm, it's evident that they are not moved by conviction. They are moved by dollars. They are moved by whatever seems good in the moment. And when you have that kind of transient kind of politician, I can't handle that. No one who really believes in this country should be able to handle that. Again, we've been conditioned to accept this. So do you think that voting could be necessarily a tool to ensure that liberty is restored to America or continues to be preserved in areas of America? Or is it a tool to break our backs with people who are concerned with expediency and not principles?
I look at voting in many cases as self-defense. And the actual act of voting, and I've seen all these arguments, and yeah, both sides present good arguments, but the actual act is not immoral itself. You're in many cases, like when I vote, I try to vote for the people that I believe will essentially use the least government force possible in the world that we live in. So that's kind of how I look at it. I never wanted to run for elected office. And I guess it was in 2012 when Ron Paul was running for president the second time, and the Republican National Convention literally blackballed his electors, just treated him terribly. They wouldn't even let him speak at the convention, wouldn't even let his electors into the convention. And I mean, I was done at that point, because I was like, there's no way. There's just no way. Okay. Because everybody knew Ron wasn't going to win, and they still just like put the boots to him. Right. But I was on another podcast with a pretty prominent libertarian, and they said that's valid, right? But also, unless we get millions of Americans to withdraw their consent from the federal government or the state and local governments, it's not realistic to think that's going to happen. For me anyway, that's kind of how I look at it. It really is a self-defense mechanism. And I think that we can promote liberty. And we have to realize too, though, often we ask elected officials, like Rand Paul get a lot of criticism in purely libertarian circles about what he does. He's operating within a system that's not libertarian. Okay. And he's trying to push it towards that way. And I think that's how we have to look at it. Is I think sometimes libertarians get caught up and I've been there too, get caught up in this is how the world should be. That's not how the world is.
And so I would run libertarian conservative cases. I'd be quoting William F. Buckley or Robert George or some other conservative intellectual, because that's just who I am. I am someone, I'm a very I adhere to tradition when the tradition helps me in my own life. But now if it doesn't help me in my own life, I move beyond it, which is why I call myself a conservatarian, because I do recognize that liberty plays a very big role in that. But they couldn't handle those arguments, or they didn't like those arguments. And so I was referred to in a lot of ways in silence by my debating peers with a lot of very disparaging remarks. So let me give you an example. One time we were prepping as a team. We had ordered fried chicken and everything. I love fried chicken personally. It's excellent. Who
doesn't like fried chicken?
Prepping as a team. Yeah. It's really excellent. As a team, and we were in a library room. And the conversation of systemic racism came up. Personally, I'm just going to give my views here. You probably can divine them. I don't think that claims of systemic racism that many people are making, that many academics are making, are as widespread and deep-rooted into the American system as folks think. I think individual racism certainly prevails. It exists in many areas. But is the entire system, from everything from hospitals to homelanders to police to judges, are all of them all participating in this what leftists would call this curse of whiteness? No. And to say so is to itself engage in a racist, collectivistic idea of what that stuff is. And that's disgusting. But we got into a conversation about that. And I said, look, can you produce material evidence of this systemic racism? Can you tell me how these systems hold you down materially in your life? One of them said to me, you know what, Christian, I won't repeat the exact word he said. When you walk off this campus, those police, they see you as an N-word, and he's black himself. They see you as an N-word. Yeah, they see you as that. And to them, you're just an N-word. So no matter how much I stick up to them, you are simply an N-word. I'm like, okay, dude, you can keep trying to claim things about me that are not true, but I follow that divine adage that Ralph Waldo Emerson said in Self-Reliance, that I have to toil on my own plot of land, that I am a unique individual, and I will let that come forth. I will not be bound to a historical perception of me that existed a very long time ago in material forms. I will make my own destiny. I will manifest my own destiny, whether you like it or not. And what they do about that? They didn't like that, because I didn't buy into the victim class idea.